Sigmund Freud has been hovering over this entire unit. His path-breaking work ignited artists' determination to explore the inner world of their psyche and gave them the freedom to portray sexual themes much more openly. Max Ernst was one of the artists who moved from Dada to Surrealism. The painting in this slide has elements of both. A nightingale threatening? That sounds Dada. But it could also be a dreamscape. Note that the work is part painting, part sculpture, part collage. These categories are breaking down as they broke down in synthetic cubism. The use of a real cabinet knob stuck into the painting likewise suggests the found object so beloved of Dada artists. The title of the work, inscribed at the base, was inspired by a fever dream the young Max Ernst experienced while in bed with the measles. As he himself recalled, and note that he speaks of himself in third person, the dream was, quote, provoked by an imitation mahogany panel opposite his bed, the grooves of the wood taking successively the aspect of an eye, a nose, a bird's head, a menacing nightingale, a spinning top, and so on. So, the nightingale is how death first manifested itself to the young Ernst. The strange figure in a suit and tie carrying away a young girl may be a reference to his sister's death as a child. Some surrealists tried to get in touch with their subconscious through automatism. That is, they tried to let their subconscious direct their painting without taking active creative charge. There was automatic writing as well. So here's a work by the Spanish artist Miro that employed automatism as well as more traditional painting. Miro began this painting by making a collage with assembled fragments cut from a catalog, and then he added dramatic accents. Do you remember Arp's collages of scattered paper? The idea is much the same. So this is probably the most famous surrealist painting, even though it's not on the list. I'm going to read from some of the Museum of Modern Art's description of this painting. Salvador Dali frequently described his painting as, quote, hand-painted dream photographs. He based this seaside landscape on the cliffs in his home region of Catalonia, Spain. The ants and melting clocks are recognizable images that Dali placed in an unfamiliar context or rendered in an unfamiliar way. The large central creature, comprised of a deformed nose and eye, was drawn from Dali's imagination, one can only hope, although it has frequently been interpreted as a self-portrait. Its long eyelashes seem insect-like. What may or may not be a tongue oozes from its nose like a fat snail from its shell. Time is the theme here, from the melting watches to the decay implied by the swarming ants. Mastering what he called the usual paralyzing tricks of eye-fooling, Dali painted this work with, and this is another interesting quote from Dali, the most imperialist fury of precision, but only, Dali added, quote, to systematize confusion and thus to help discredit completely the world of reality. So he uses realism to undercut reality. Yes, it is a strange world. So here's another example of the surrealist twist on art. This famous painting of a couple praying was enormously popular in France. Millet, you may recall, was a realist painter. And in France, it was seen mostly as a lovely, sentimental scene of rural piety, very simple people. But the painting spooked Salvador Dali. Dali insisted that this was a funeral scene, not a prayer, and that the couple was praying and mourning over a dead infant. This was not a popular view, but Dali managed to get the Louvre to x-ray the painting, and by golly, x-rays revealed that there was a small coffin overpainted by the basket. Apparently, Millet thought a basket would be more appealing to buyers than a dead baby. So here's Dali's own description of his reaction to the painting. Quote, in June 1932, there suddenly came to my mind, without any close or conscious association, can't have any thinking, right? The image of the Angelus of Millet. It made a great impression on me, and was most upsetting to me because, although in my vision everything corresponds exactly to the reproductions of the picture, it appeared to me nevertheless absolutely modified and changed. The Angelus of Millet suddenly became for me the pictorial work which was the most troubling. the most enigmatic, the most dense, and the richest in unconscious thoughts that I had ever seen. This seems like a rather odd candidate painting to have this strong emotional psychological reaction, but what Dali did with it was pretty weird too. This is the painting he produced in response to his dream vision. It sort of resembles the original Angelus, but with some very big differences. So here's the explanation from the Dali Museum. In this painting, the couple appears as an ancient monumental ruins in a moonlit landscape. Dali painted them so that the female, looking like a praying mantis, towers over the male, whom Dali depicts as dominated and vulnerable. And by the way, this is very Freudian, the image of the scary, devouring female and the poor, oppressed male. This is pretty much pre-feminist art. At any rate, to continue from the Dali Museum, two pairs of figures observe the couple. Both show Dali as a child accompanied by an adult. The pointing figure is his father, the seated one is his nanny. These references to childhood, the reminiscence in the title, suggest fragments of memory uncovered through introspection. If not, this is a McConnell edition, through psychoanalysis. Okay, so now prepare to be really intrigued or creeped out. The Dali Museum actually has entered into a collaboration with Disney Studios to produce a virtual reality experience of this painting. So here's a quick introductory clip from YouTube. I'm showing you this not only because it's cool and I'm pretty sure you'll like it, but also because I think the animation actually captures something of the dreamlike spirit of surrealism. Okay, that was a lot of buildup because this is, in fact, the only surrealist work we have other than, well, I guess the jungle that we're going to see in a minute is partly classified as surrealist. But at any rate, this is a required work, and let's hear from our presenter. Well, at this point, you've probably heard all this, but this object was inspired by a conversation between Merritt Oppenheim and artist Pablo Picasso and Dora Maar at a Paris cafe. So, admiring Oppenheim's fur-covered bracelet, Picasso remarked, well, one could cover fur with anything with fur, to which she replied, even this cup and saucer. Soon after, when asked by André Breton, the leader of the Surrealist movement, to participate in the first Surrealist exhibition dedicated to objects, Oppenheim bought a teacup, a saucer, and a spoon at a department store and covered them with the fur of a Chinese gazelle. In so doing, she transformed genteel items traditionally associated with feminine decorum, ladies in furs, into sensuous and sexually punning tableware. Like so much about the art in this unit, this one is all about sex, and I'll let you fill in the blanks about just what this might resemble in the eye of the viewer. Okay, this wasn't a work or artist that I knew before this year, which was my loss because it's a new favorite. Still, and this is why I was saying we only had one surrealist work and then caught myself, I struggled with where to put this in the course. Before we get to our student presentation, so let me ask, where do you think this painting should be classified? Well, there are a lot of similarities to Picasso's Demoiselles and other Cubist works, especially note those mask-like faces based on African masks. The jungle setting created from color blocks has a bit of an expressionist flair, and there's an element of protest art as well. However, Lam is considered a surrealist painter. Maybe our presenters explain why. So here's what the Museum of Modern Art says. And again, this may be something you've already heard, but in his desire to express the spirit of Afro-Cuban culture, in particular that of uprooted Africans who brought their primitive culture, their magical religion with its mystical side in close correspondence with nature, that was all a quote from the artist, Lam reinforces the surrealistic aspect of this work. So Wilfredo Lam was born and raised in a village in a sugar farming province of Cuba. His father, interestingly enough, was a Chinese immigrant. His mother was Afro-Cuban of slave descent. In his village, Lam was surrounded by Afro-Cubans who practiced both Catholicism and the Santeria religion that was based on African traditions. So that in the jungle, the presence of the horsewoman, or the woman horse, who in Afro-Cuban mysticism refers to a spirit in communication with the natural world, mirrors Lam's own confrontational dialogue with the so-called primitive interest expressed in advanced European painting. In other words, on the one hand, he, like Picasso, who was his mentor, is attracted to these so-called primitive images, but since he descends from Africans, he's also, kind of offended and perplexed by this. Very interesting and I think somewhat conflicted painting. The Horsewoman is very interesting, and here's another painting by Lam of this figure from Santeria mythology. And here's another jungle scene with magical animals. Now, I think the surreal side comes out more clearly in this painting. Also, as I mentioned a little bit earlier, this is a work with a social message, so it's protest art as well. I've circled 2 sugar canes. Cuba in the 1940s had an economy based on tourism and sugarcane. Cuba was the Las Vegas of its day. What happened in Havana stayed in Havana, and it was overrun by wealthy Americans eager to party. It was also a plantation economy where Cubans, and especially Afro-Cubans, performed backbreaking labor in the sugarcane fields. So this is really partly a painting about exploitation. Lam, by the way, supported Castro's revolution, and in 1965, he was invited to paint this work for the presidential palace. It's entitled Third World. I mentioned that Lam was a protege of Picasso's. We've seen paintings from Picasso's Blue Period, several of his Cubist works, but he also spent several years painting Surrealist works. Here's a painting that features the Minotaur from the legends of ancient Crete. Well, Picasso had not been especially political during the years between World War I and World War II, a time when a lot of artists were very involved in political and social issues. But the Spanish Civil War changed all of that. In particular, the bombing of the small town of Guernica by the German Luftwaffe, which was helping out Franco and getting a chance to practice its new machines. I wish we had more time for this painting. It is really amazing that it was dropped off the list, but I want you to at least look at it and to look at this brief video clip. I wish I had time for Simon Schama's long, fascinating account of the creation of this work. I don't, but he did make one comment that I'd like to share. Picasso had led the charge for modernism against stale conventions of Academy painting. What's interesting, though, is that this is actually, if you think about it, a return to that tradition with a difference. It's a large-scale history painting, the kind of painting that the Academy wanted. So basically, Picasso has taken that tradition and twisted it with a modernist flair.